Hello, I to Top Deliverability podcast. Today's guest is somebody that I truly respect because this person been involved in the email industry since ever. He's a veteran, he's a true expert, contributed to the email security space, even legal aspects around email world. It worked for some of the biggest and again, most influential companies in the space. I'm talking about Dayman. And so welcome, Dennis. Hi.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. As I was saying, I tried very poorly to introduce you. So can you tell us about you a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. So I've been doing this now a little bit over 30 years. I kind of accidentally fell into it a little bit. I was a self-taught geek, if you will. My family worked for, well, back in the day, it was SBC or SW Bell, which is now known as AT&T. But I kind of grew up around the telecom industry just because of my family and my relatives. But in reality, my degree was actually in law enforcement. And so I had planned on going through that sort of process and going into the FBI and doing a lot of, cool work, including my master's, my PhD, when my father called me one day and said, hey, before you go back to school, back to university, the thing that you're on, the internet, and I was one of the few kids on the block that either had a Packard Bell 386 or even a 486 SX computer. I had a couple of modems in there because I had free phone lines. I think I had 4 phone lines, and I was running a bulletin board system, and I was always on Usenet. And so like a lot of folks that have been in the industry a while, like back then we were, connecting with people, just chatting with them. And at the same time, keeping the garbage out of the news groups and the bulletin boards that we were running. And that sort of became a passion, right? Privacy is an important thing to me these days. And so when people misuse a resource, it really kind of angers me a little bit. So anyways, my father had told me that this job had existed, and I didn't think I would ever get the position because they were looking for somebody who had a compliance or legal background. And I'm like, well, I'm going into like law enforcement. I'm not going in to be a lawyer. And I went in for the interview, and the interview, AT&T had just purchased Pac Bell. And interestingly enough, the person that was interviewing me was visiting from Pac Bell out of California, and it was Nick Nicholas, for those that might remember Nick. And I went through the interview process, and next thing I know, I was one of the new, positions. This was probably the second or third position after even a more famous person named Afterburner, if you will, had been working in this sort of, area. And so I started to work on anti-abuse very early on in my career and never looked back. It became one of those really kind of interesting places to be as the mainstream internet was really coming into play. And so I worked for several years with AT&T, really got a true understanding of what it was like to build the internet, DNS, MX records, MTAs, all that fun sort of stuff. And then working with people, in the industry who I had never physically met. And back then we didn't even have the devices that do FaceTime and whatnot. But, you would meet really interesting people and you would volunteer and you would help, right? And it really kind of felt good to be able to do these sorts of things because, you were learning, but you were having a positive effect on this resource. And so, so I've been doing this about 30 years. And so I've worked for companies like AT&T. I even went to work for Verizon for about 2 years, in their security group. I had an opportunity to work with Paul Vixie in the early stages of Maps and the RBL that we had created back then. And basically did a lot of great sort of work on the receiving side of things before eventually realizing, well, I can take all this knowledge and I can go maybe on the sending side, right? Or the other side of the equation that was out there. And so I had an opportunity to work with companies like Strongmail during the days of like SPF and working on the standards to put those together, Chem, right? Early stages of putting some of those standards together, and then continually to work that compliance work, from deliverability to being responsible for the legal aspects of deliverability to being responsible for the privacy aspects of deliverability, and thus continue to sort of grow the career, unbeknownst to me, that it would end up, all these years later as a chief information security officer and a chief privacy officer. So it's been a lot of fun. But I've worked for Strongmail, companies like Eloqua, when we invented marketing automation, even went to work for a company called ReturnPath that I was an advisor to and became their security person, Proofpoint, Marpost. Who am I missing here? Oh, Code 42 is another one. And then recently Constant Contact. So
yeah,
it's been great. It's been a great 30 years of a career and seeing, where we're at. So, yeah.
Yeah, really a resume that it's impossible to beat. Congrats for such an amazing career. And I know that you are also looking for new opportunities right now. So whoever is going to hire you is going to be really a smart, lucky company. So you started on the recipient side. When you arrived on the other side of the fence, what was maybe one of the first few things that really came handy to you that you were bringing from the recipient side?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, actually. Interestingly enough, when I was still at Verizon, that is when we had an opportunity to start and found MAWG, right? The Messaging Anti-Abuse Malware Mobile Group. We were looking for ways to, well, I obviously share intel, right, with other receivers that were out there. And that was a great time, right? We were obviously like now, back then, we were writing best common practices documents, right? And the whole idea was for me to say, okay, at Verizon, this is what we've done to mitigate abuse. And so here's the recommendation to BCP. And if at the time, America Online or others wanted to adopt that, it's been great. And when I left Verizon to go to the sending side, to StrongMail, kind of realized that there was another part of this equation, right? We had the receivers, but then we had the senders, right? And so they make up, right, the internet, or a portion of how communication is done. And so when I got to the sending side, it was interesting, already working with some large brands and hearing their problems, right? I can't get the email delivered, or it goes to junk, or at the time, Spam Assassin is marking my emails as junk. And so it became very, very clear to me that what we had been doing on the receiver side, we needed to do for the senders, right? And so at the time, myself and another gentleman, Ben Isaacson, who was with it was Experian. Yes, it was Experian. They were also having some issues with email. And so he and I sort of teamed up, and, I had already been in MAWG, and he had been to a couple of meetings, over time. And we started the Senders Special Interest Group, or the SIG back then. That's what we used to call those. And so what that allowed, and again, sort of me walking into the sender side, realizing there wasn't sort of a manual for senders and for brands and marketers to do the right things, we realized we needed to create one of these things. And so that was the first iteration of the Senders Best Common Practices document that was created. And obviously, back then it was a little more simpler, but, it talked about all the things that you should be doing as a sender of email. No matter whether you were a email service provider or you were a brand or marketer, these are the ways to make sure that you're not looked at as spam, but more as ham, right? That you're not the junk mail. And so that was one of the more clearer things to me, was walking and realizing all these different companies were competing. All these email service providers were competing and saying, hey, we deliver mail better, right? Why compete? Why not work together to create a nice, practices document? And you can compete on price and features. But deliverability was one of those things that if we wanted to protect the internet, right, from the tragedy of the commons when it comes to email, we have to work together. And so that was probably one of the first things that came to mind, that when I was out there, is we just needed to work together.
Yeah, MAWG and everything you mentioned about even the senders group, that alone is a huge achievement, and all the work that is being done by the group is insane. I know that people that are watching and will watch this podcast, maybe some of them aren't fully familiar with what MAWG is. Of course, I'll put a link in the description, but everybody can take advantage of some of the awesome documents that MAWG publishes, because every time people ask about best practices, or we were saying, should we do or shouldn't do, MAWG already told the world how to do certain things. So go check those BCPs. Again,
they're free for anybody to use.
Description.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it, is like, you don't have to be a member of the organization. Anybody can use these. We want you to be a member of the organization, obviously, as one of the volunteers that are there. I know that you and I are always doing our work there, but you don't have to be a member to do the right thing. Right. And so all those BCPs are published. Any studies, any of the comments that we might make on certain, requests for comments from the government and whatnot, those are all freely available for people to take a look at, to understand the position, understand the soon to be, new directions. Right. Now, obviously, being a member within the organization, you'll be able to attend the meetings and the things that you and I get to do, right, where you might hear about a little bit early that, hey, Gmail's making a massive change in terms of how they're going to be accepting mail when it comes to authentication and whatnot. And if you're not, on that cusp of that, whether it's a need to be aware of a technology change that you need to build into your practices, or be ready to, flip a switch at a certain date, right? Those sorts of things do help being a member. But yeah, you're right. It's a free resource. Take advantage of these BC.
Yeah. And if you are a member or became a member, as Dennis said, the beauty is that you will work as peers with people that on paper might be from a different company that is supposed to be a competitor of yours, but we really work for the common interest and a common goal, and that's really priceless.
Yeah.
So yeah, big fan of Mog as well, as you know. What was and what is your main driver in anti-abuse?
There was a couple of pieces to it. One is just to be helpful, right? I think, the way that we all have to work together is what make things, work. Even now, I mean, I'm 51 now. I'm still doing things not just, on the technology side, but even in my own community, right? Some of you guys know that I'm a volunteer firefighter and I've been doing that for a while. I volunteer in such ways which, helps, it benefits others that are in need, right? And when you sort of look at the work that we're, trying to do here, it's the same thing. It's like, especially like when you've got younger people coming into this field, right? They may not know the right things to do, whether they're on the receiver side or the sending side, right? And so developing all this information and these abilities to kind of, impress on them the knowledge that a lot of us, and I'm not a graybeard yet. I don't have that graybeard like some of our friends and advisors at MOG do yet, but, they passed on a lot of that information on to us, over the years, and the experiences and the thought processes behind that. So yeah, I think as you take a look at that sort of like, work in that career, it's that's number one. I think the second part of it, I think I had mentioned earlier, is really, it drives me insane. As you know, and you've seen my LinkedIn post occasionally, when people misuse information, spam is one of the things that just drives me up the wall, right? It's people who grab my information and, from a privacy perspective, do not respect my choices, right? My consent behind the use of my data. A lot of folks have seen me, complain about companies that have purchased data and then started to market to me either in email or even in postal mail as well. It is one of the big drivers for me. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's a justice sort of thing. I mean, it's nice when I can complain to them. And sometimes, if it is an actual known spammer or spammer that's on a network, to get their account kicked off, right? And for them to lose their access, that is kind of nice. But it's really about sort of me knowing what it feels like not to have control over my information and how I'm communicated with. If I know what that feels like, then I can do a better job in any one of the companies that I'm working with to make sure that whoever's platform it is, or whatever company might be using that platform, or even if it's with a brand of some sort, that they know how to treat people with respect in their information. Unfortunately, in recent years, and it seems to be getting even worse over the last year, and we were just talking about that over the Slack group around, I won't name the company, but that one company that keeps scraping data off the internet and sending spam. Come on, guys. I mean, really, you shouldn't be doing that. So if I can take the impacts and the feelings that I have about it and make effective change in other places, then that's even better for other individuals that might be out there on the internet who are disturbed by this, but don't know what to do about it.
So I guess your take on cold mail is not very soft.
Yeah.
Oftentimes cold mailing is strict B2B, and there are some nuances there, and cold mailers tend to take advantage of those parts. Now, I think that cold mailing won't disappear anytime soon. However, I suspect that things will get harder for them in the next couple of years.
Mhm.
What do you think about the future of cold mailing?
I think it's going to get more interesting over time. When we invented marketing automation over at Eloqua, right, we talk about the sales funnel, right? Marketing qualified leads at the top, sales qualified leads coming out the bottom of it, and then bam, marketing can then take that lead and then hand it over to sales and say, hey, go close the deal, right? We've taken the body language that you and I have right now interacting with each other in the digital realm. You lose that ability to understand if the person may or may not be interested, in that discussion. Right. And so we had to figure out a way in which we could still connect with the buyers that were out there, but do it in such a way where it was still respectful by sending the right message to the right person at the right time. And you've heard that term, or those three terms, a lot. And so we looked at, okay, if they're going to an event, we actually still even asked permission, or like by signing up for this event, we may send you relevant, information that's here, and you may opt out of that at any, time. And of course, a lot of the C-suite buyers in the B2B realm never really did that. Right. But we would then send them a message, and we would then watch what they were sort of doing within the email, right? So were they clicking on it? Did they transpose, or did they go to the website and continue to click and look at other information, showing an interest in what that company that was using the Eloqua platform for could then maybe send another message to them, right? Of course, obviously giving them still the ability to opt out, right? All the legalities and stuff like that, and making that very clear and easy. But it was done in such a respectful way, and at every touch point that was there, they still had the ability to change that direction or to get out of the opportunity. I think from the cold email perspective, as you stated, it's probably, yes, it's going to get a little bit harder. And I think that's going to be for a couple of reasons. Years ago, right, we talked about email authentication and authorization, right, using, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. But, the adoption has been a little bit slower, I think, at least in my my opinion, that I would have loved to see over the last couple of years. But that is a massive change. I mean, even when I implement some of the more stricter authentication rules on my own personal domain, and my parents and my family actually are on the same thing, I get occasional calls from them going, "Hey, I'm not getting this password reset, or I'm not getting this." And it's interesting to see, like, even at Yahoo, there was some issues where they hadn't quite properly authenticated their email for their outbound email yet. And so it's been one of those sort of like learning experiences for people to adopt these technologies. But I think now, like when the 800-pound gorilla in the room, like, Gmail, Google is a good example. They're making some changes right now in terms of requirements, some harder requirements that are going to be there on the email authentication and authorization side. So I think, as we see those things get pushed out more, well, the receivers that are out there are now going to have a lot more data that's going to be coming in about whether this person or the sender or this author of the message really is spam or not spam, thus driving the continuation of a reputation, right, that we've always had, an idea of. But I also think what you're probably going to see is, as newer technologies like AI get put into this, will AI be making some of those decisions and looking at that email and saying whether that it believes that this is a cold email, or is it going to go off like agentic AI might, right? Agentic AI can go off and say, I'm looking at this email and I'm going to go create a new connection or an API connection to this database and see what others have said about this email, right? This is newer kind of stuff that's going to be coming about. And I think as that happens, right, people who are cold emailing might have a little bit of a wake up call as to what automated systems may be thinking about that moving forward and top of reputation.
Yeah, so even the impact of AI is gonna be interesting there, because we know that it will be an opportunity for every side, even for cold mailers, and they will try to take advantage. But most cold mailers, per my experience, they tend to be less knowledgeable. They like the shortcuts. Cold mailing oftentimes is done as a shortcut. We know that it can work, it can drive business for them. That's why they do it. But they ignore best practices, they ignore those signals, the true signals of interest as well. The shorter the life it will be in the market. But also in terms of threats, AI is gonna be big, is already big, right? So it's getting bigger. What is your take about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because, we were just recently, Mog and myself, we were just at the anti-phishing working group e-crimes event in Coronado about 2 weeks ago. I had the opportunity to take some of the training that they had done on that Monday. And one of those training courses was about how to use AI within security or email. And I think I might have done a post about it on LinkedIn, but it was interesting because it was like, how can AI help look at spam that's coming inbound? And one of the examples that they had used in some of the code that was actually provided to us was the ability to check for domain authenticity, right? The age of the domain, whether, like, I think the example was like PayPal, was like PayPal-login.com. Is that a real domain owned by PayPal? Is this other one PayPal-something a domain that, is owned by PayPal? And turns out, the one that we thought wouldn't have been owned by PayPal, and the way that they were doing this nomenclature, both domains actually were owned by PayPal, and we would have incorrectly have guessed that domain was not a phishing domain. And AI actually kind of somewhat got it wrong too, because it looked at the registration and the timing of it, and maybe some of the usage. And so, there was some of those sorts of concerns that we were sort of taking a look. But, if I put my CISO hat on for a second, we talk about the use of AI in several different ways. Even at Code 42, when I was still there before we got acquired by Mimecast, we were looking for ways to look at data and to be able to present to the analyst, once the reporting or the processing of the data was done, really what the analyst should be focused on today versus tomorrow. Because at one point, like, you're throwing all of these reports, whether it's anti-spam or otherwise, in any one of these platforms, you're always throwing a lot of it at the analyst, and it's very hard for them to shuffle through it. And so the use of AI for us, at least at Code 42, and again, that was insider risk management, not email, but it allowed them to focus on the top 4 or 5 situations, and then the other ones could be put aside until later in the afternoon or the next day. I think from an email perspective, we're going to see that a little bit. We're going to see where hopefully AI can either automate some blocking, it can make some of the necessary changes to throttling that some receivers are still doing. It may be able to make some of the necessary changes to the content filtering if they're still using some of those things. But on the other side of that equation, you still now have the spammers and hackers or spackers, or what you want to call them, right? We still have them doing the same thing. They're using AI to quickly change or to morph, if you will, the things that they want to get in. And so if they've been able to send out a bunch of email, but then all of a sudden it's starting to block, can AI technology either change throttling, change where it may be coming from in terms of a botnet network? Can it change a couple of words in the content, right? We've all seen spam come in and we're like, this email makes absolutely no sense in terms of what they shoved in here, right? But they're trying to trick the spam filters. So we do see, and we do expect to see even more on the other side of that, where they're using AI to try to get through and to get by all these things. The whole idea around like, 0-day exploits and whatnot, I think that's even going to get harder. But on the email side of things, 0 days are supposed to be kind of kept secret, right? And not secret, but you only use them when you really want to, cause some havoc. On the spam side of things, as these rules are changing so dang fast, within the same day, I think you're going to see AI trying to help out a lot of individuals get more email through when they get blocked.
And while you were explaining this, I was also thinking about the good senders and how they could or should differentiate themselves from the bad ones and those in between. So what do you think that senders should do? Like, what advice you would give to brands and senders in general to improve their chance to land in the inbox and to do the right thing in a way that their deliverability will be good?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, the easiest things to obviously begin with is to start making sure that you're doing all the best practices when it comes to infrastructure, whether that's MX records or, authentication authorization records, proper, reverse DNS, all those sorts of things that we typically kind of forget about or take advantage of in a sense, right? And then obviously there are the ideas of making sure, again, like I said, like sending the right message to the right person at the right time, especially if you have a relationship or a consent, right? That'll have, better results for you, where I'm not hitting the spam button because I have no idea what this means and why you sent this to me at this one point. I'd also tell them too, like, as you're putting together these programs and these procedures, again, start to think about yourself. Start to think about, you and I have always talked about the grandmother test, right? Would you do these sorts of things to your family members and to your grandmother? And if you wouldn't, then don't make it happen, right? Even right now, my wife and I are joking that, as we're about to celebrate a holiday here in the US, this begins the time period where her inbox begins to fill up with everything because everybody believes that they have to send a message. And it's like, no, you really don't have to always send an email. Take a look at other technologies that are out there as well. I know that sounds weird for somebody who's an email, but if you need to take a look at social media and other avenues, right, that are out there, do that. Too many companies seem to be relying on email as their only way of thinking that they can get through. But with all the technologies and all these apps that we all have today and the social media systems and communication systems that are out there, you can look for other methods of trying to market your information where it can be just a simple ad. But I would definitely take a look at that too. But, again, just make sure that you're, doing best practices. But the other pieces of it too is you make sure that you're connecting with people and that you're a part of the group. What I mean by that is, a lot of the receivers out there offer options for you to get feedback loops and other sorts of knowledge. Go to the email conferences, right? Go, participate in some of the email groups. I think, as you and I are in the MOG Slack group as members, there are other groups like Email Geeks that a lot of people will go participate in. So participate as much as you can, I would say as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that will give people different perspective and will educate them ideally on best practices. And so you mentioned some very important setup related things, reverse DNS, things like that, education you mentioned. You didn't mention Beamy. And I know that Beamy, at first, at least, you weren't a big fan of it. What is your stance on Beamy right now?
I think first, like on Bimmy, I mean, like we were working on it, obviously at Return Path even when I was still there, and sort of trying to understand what the benefits I think were going to be for people other than just sort of brand recognition or email recognition didn't sit very well with me because to me, that didn't mean that the email was good, right? It's like, okay, yeah, so I see an email came from this vendor, right? Or let's say Best Buy is an example, not to pick on Best Buy, but okay, I got an email from them. Great. I've got a Bimmy, indicator here, but does that really mean that I was supposed to get the message or whatnot? In fact, actually, my wife and I, it's funny, actually, we were just laughing. I literally just this morning got an email from a company or from a toy. Again, if you remember, my sons are now 24 now, so they're adults now. But I got an email from a company that we had purchased a toy from almost 10 plus years ago. Out of the blue today. And I went, seriously? Like I sold that thing a long time ago and I had no idea that we still had an email or that they had my email address on file. But it was kind of interesting. Now, of course, I unsubscribed, right? Because that's what needs to happen. I didn't complain and I didn't scratch my head and go, wait a minute, They know they haven't emailed me in 10 years. Why would you send to me? But anyways, but all that to say that I didn't think at the time like Benny would basically help us understand really about the permissioning or sort of, the age of, the email. It's just a recognizable thing, and really was all also about trying to protect brands from being abused, their marketing being abused by spammers, right? Because again, we've seen that all the time. Over time, there still has been some change in my thinking, but it's interesting that we still haven't seen this massive adoption, of it. I joke all the time about this, but even when I was at Strongmail, I would have bet $1,000 back then that RSS was going to be a big thing. And I still use RSS actually because I get a lot of different feeds that I want to read on things. But I would have bet that RSS was going to be the way to move email into, and of course I was wrong about that. But yeah, but Bimini just hasn't really gotten the traction that's out there because I think people are still trying to understand the benefit of it. And really, when you start adding in some additional complexities to it, like validation certifications and whatnot, that becomes even crazier, right? So it's been interesting sort of watching that one kind of come up and up and down over time.
And by the way, I'm also not a big Bini fan.
Yeah.
For similar reasons, and in general, I think that the only reason why it could have some traction was and is because the marketing team has more budget than IT or whatever other department might have a word on it. The Bimi is one of those things that tickles the interest of marketers, and they're like, okay, we'll spend.
Right.
We should spend money here and drive a bit of adoption for DMARC and other more meaningful protocols. Bimi was oversold since day one. There were claims that Bimi improves deliverability since day one. And the deliverability guy, I was like, come on. Come on. I'm not against Bimi, but I'm not even praising it like it's the
next best thing. Well, I mean, that's what happened to SPF and DKIM, right? Everybody, at least some people thought, well, if I'm authenticating my email, I'll get better inbox placement. Well, what happened? Well, spammers are authenticating their own email now, right? It doesn't matter. Lookalike domains, they're doing that sort of thing. I think when we saw Bimi, right, we saw a lot of companies that they wanted to sort of ride. I remember like how fun it was creating or to take, what's now the DKIM standard, right? There was two standards, if you remember back then. One was Yahoo and Google, right? And so they had their own sort of ideas around this, and we combined them to get DKIM, and that was a lot of fun work with the IETF and others, that were out there.
Cisco, I believe.
Oh, sorry, Cisco. You're right. I'm sitting here going, I know it was Yahoo, but I couldn't remember who the other one was. But yeah, you're right. It was Cisco. But yeah, it felt like, I don't know, a lot of these companies that are in our space were like, ooh, big advantage. Let's go after it. If we jump on this, our customers are going to be excited, or we're going to win customers over this thing. And we went, not really. Because again, even if they authenticate and they get Bimi through, it could still be spam. It doesn't right at this point. So yeah, I mean, I'm not against it, but I'm not supporting it right now, putting time and effort into it because I just don't know where it's gonna go and really what the benefit's going to be for everybody in the long run.
Outside the email world, what is your take on scams and things like that? What is the biggest threat?
This year seemed to be a real big focus on scams that were especially coming in from telephony. I spent some time at the NCFTA event. I spent some time with about 3 or 4 other organizations where we were their guests this round. MOG has a group called Growth and Development. And so what our work is to reach into other areas and help others, like teach the teacher. So we have relationships in Japan, as you know, relationships in Africa, relationships in Latin America. And while they're not our instances of MOG, it's like they own those organizations and we help give them information and teach and vice versa. And then the same thing happens with, several other like nonprofit coalitions. We go in and we sit down and we talk with them. And so this year, like I said, I went to a lot of events this year that almost every single one of them had predominantly, a theme around scams within, telephony. We have seen a huge increase of attacks on the elderly and other individuals, on these devices. One of the reasons I think, in my opinion, that we tend to see it now happening there, it's very hard to actually, to some extent, I should say, to stop that information from getting there. Over the years in email, right, it was pretty easy to do a block list, right? Or, like maps, like we would put a bunch of IP addresses in and anybody that subscribed to it would then never, ever see that email because it would get blocked at the MTA level, right? And then over the years, as you know, again, providers gave unsubscribe mechanisms. And again, that email would just automatically go to junk, or maybe they would never see it. We don't necessarily have that sort of control yet today. Now, it is getting better. I mean, in the last iOS update to 26, they've now done a breakdown where one box is literally messages from known contacts, and there's another one for unknown senders, and then they're kind of doing almost a categorical sort of box, like, when you get alerts and other things too. But the spammers and the hackers that are out there know that it's very difficult in some cases as well, depending on the country as well. We're still trying to figure out that interconnectivity, sort of like, should this provider block this provider from sending stuff over? And it's really hard to sort of just say yes, right? Because that'll solve it all. But then you could have an impact on necessities and emergencies and things like that. And so we continue to see this uptick in this, the situation where, again, using telephony devices to scam people. And then even because of AI, right? We talked about it earlier, being able to fake people's voices and things like that. This device, while I absolutely love having my music and my phone and my camera here, it's great. I wish it was smaller, but these things have become sort of a problem for us as human beings. We're always on them, right? We're always looking at them, and they're always giving us these numbers and these alerts, and it causes us to have this angst and this want or need to always be doing something on it. And so that hurry up sort of mentality is also another way that I think these hackers and whatnot are taking advantage of us. If they can trick us into say that my relative, whoever that is, has been injured in an accident, or, that's the voice that I'm hearing, or they've been arrested, of course I'm going to react immediately, because that's what I'm trained to do, or at least by having this device. So yeah, I think between AI, I think using AI and telephony, I think the scams are definitely increasing. We have to get out there in front of it. We have to work to figure out ways to protect the elderly, to protect those that are at higher risk. We need governments, I think, to give more control to the carriers to make the necessary decisions to cut off these things, to be able to block other providers that may or may not be dealing with the situations that are ongoing. It'd be very similar to what we saw in the early stages of email, where we would actually see large receivers or ISPs block another one out, and then for a couple of days you wouldn't be able to get email to them at all because they were just done with it. I don't think we need to go to that draconian effort, but we need to be able to take these identifiers. We also need to be able to secure, I think, as well, the telephony system. It's still too easy to do fraudulent phone numbers and things like that, or even fake ANI and whatnot too. So it's kind of weird. It's like almost like 30 years ago. Now we're doing this all over again on the telephony side of things.
Yeah, kind of funny. The fact that the telephony now is catching up on some of those things that already happened to email. They're both quite old, but telephony is older. It's intriguing, and it's definitely scary. Everybody can fall for a scam, honestly, everybody. Those techniques can get better to a point that we really cannot tell if it's a scammer or not. But even we do so many things. We are always busy, and we are always with a phone on our end. So we wait for the next Amazon parcel, whatever. There is an Amazon parcel, email, or even phone call about some driver, some courier that's gonna deliver something to me, and like, yeah, sure. Tell me, what is missing? Oh yeah, I'll tell you all my PII that you need. Just so, whatever. So, and elderly could be even more fragile there. So it's terrible. I really hope that we'll find some, not solution, because there won't be a solution, but at least some additional layer of security like we did with email. But yeah, it will be interesting. And I think that Android and iPhone, they are integrating systems to combat that kind of issues.
So we see that now within Google, right? I might click on something and all of a sudden I get that red box and it's like, sorry, this is being blocked by Google. I will say that, yes, technology, I think, is a way to do it. What really gets to me, and I'm probably, talking more about the United States these days, but you know what? Like, again, I'm 51. So like when I went through school, I had to take like home economics, right? So I had to learn how to do budgets. I learned how to cook. I learned how to what? Like they taught you life skills back then. We've gotten rid of all that, right? Now it's all core curriculum, math and reading. And don't get me wrong, all that's important. But we don't teach the responsibility of these devices. We usually leave it to the parents to do. And, again, like my boys they're a little bit ahead on this because of what I did for a living. But most parents don't know the dangers of these devices by giving them to the children. And so it would be nice that, if we could see this kind of come back into the classroom a little bit to say, hey, like, yeah, we're going to teach you how to be smart, but we're also going to teach you how to have like some street smarts too, right? It's one of the the things that I think if you can ingrain that into people, it's like driving a car. Like most of the time, most people know don't drink and drive and wear your seatbelt, right? You're still going to have the outliers that are out there, but we've ingrained that into people as a part of their training when they go to get their driver's license. We don't even do that with these devices.
Yeah. So it's about investing in education since we cannot make them take a license to own a phone, sadly.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
At least we can do our best to
Yeah.
educate. Well, you've been around in their space for 30 years. What do you see happening the next 30 or maybe even just the next three? Let's start with that. Let's start with the next three.
I thought by now we would solve the email problem, right? We haven't. We just have not solved it. So it's really sort of difficult to say that in the next 3 or 30 years that will be solved. I think as we come up with new ideas and new technology, some of these problems are just going to still exist, right? I'll go back to the car example. It's like we keep making cars and we keep making them safe, or we keep adding things to make them safe, but they still crash. And people, human fallacy, people still do dumb things with them. And I think it doesn't matter how much technology that we put behind something, we're still going to have these issues always moving forward, whether it's email or otherwise. I think what we are going to see, though, is that you'll have, again, in cars, you're going to have more distractions. Like I laugh at the fact that most cars or some of these cars now are being sold without buttons, and you're not going to press a screen. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, that's not what I needed. The same thing is going to happen here, right? Some new phone technology is going to come out, something that's going to happen that either spammers and hackers are going to take advantage of, or it's going to take away from our sort of, mindset and our viewpoint. That's always going to be there. So we're not going to be able to solve all this. AI is going to be adding into this. And I think that that's probably one of the bigger focuses that we have right now is what's AI going to do? How is AI going to be misusing our data? How is it going to be used as a security tool to either stop things, or how is it going to be used as a tool to circumvent security? It's really hard to sort of see that, but the next 3 to 5 years, I think AI is going to be a big focus, and I think we need to continue to push more knowledge and more information into the hands of the consumers to know the internet's a great resource. It really is, but there comes responsibility behind it and using it and being a part of that. And that same sort of message has to also go to the corporations that are also a part of it, those that are providing the services that we use, whether it's social media or otherwise, right? So I think that has to be talked about as well.
Well, Dennis, thank you so much. Really, thank you from the deep of my heart to spend some time with me and to share all your knowledge and expertise with the audience. So really hope to see you very soon, maybe at the next MOG conference.
Yeah, we'll be back in San Diego. That'll be fun.
Would be nice. Yeah. So thank you again. And you will always be welcome here. The door is always open for you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you here pretty soon again.
Ciao.